Thank you. Welcome to the Trust-Based Philanthropy for Community Foundations Learning Series. Today's session will be on engaging donors and DAF holders in the trust-based journey. I'm Shantia Sport, the Director of Programs at the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project. For a physical descriptor, I am a Black woman sitting sitting in front of a white wall with some artwork and diplomas. I have shoulder-length hair. And a Black top on. And for my land acknowledgement, I am seated on Lenni Lenape Native land, also known as Philadelphia, and I'm so glad to be here with you all today. Thank you for joining us. Just a few housekeeping guidelines for you all. We ask that you please keep your microphones muted during this time, unless you're having open discussion with us. We encourage you to use the chat box for questions, comments, and dialogue, and plenty of engagement. We encourage engagement in the chat. We encourage you to use the most recent version of Zoom for all of its different capabilities. We also have live cart transcription available for those with that accessibility need. You need any help with that, feel free to reach out to my colleague Danielle on the call. And also, of course, the session will be recorded and posted on our website for future reference. So this is part 2 of a 2-part series we're doing on trust-based philanthropy for community foundations. In part 1, we heard from some amazing panelists, Kia Griffiths from the Albuquerque Community Foundation, Patricia Mejia from the San Antonio Area Foundation, and Sharon Miracle at the Yakima Valley Community Foundation. And in that session, we really got into the nuts and bolts of what it looks like to operationalize trust-based philanthropy at a community foundation. We heard some great examples of ways that community foundations are really implementing some of these practices. And we're not going to get into the practices, but if you're not familiar with them, if you're completely new to trust-based philanthropy, we encourage you to check out our website and to learn more about those practices. But there's a lot happening with community foundations and operationalizing this, particularly around the discretionary funding. And we also lifted up what it looks like to address the impact for community foundations, some of those hurdles that they may have experienced in operationalizing this work, and cultivating some of that board buy-in, and even fostering internal alignment. So if you did not get a chance to check out that first session, our recording for that is on our website. We encourage you to check that out. And in part 2 of this session, we're really excited to dig into this conversation where we talk about what it looks like to engage donors and DAF holders in the trust-based journey. And we know community foundations have difficulty a lot of times really thinking about what that could look like and how to bring donors and DAF holders along on that journey. So we'll explore some ways to do that and discuss that and reflect on what that can look like in an ideal philanthropic world, and understand that unique role of community foundations as conveners and relationship brokers within the community. So for our agenda, of course, we're starting with our opening right now. We'll give a little bit of grounding, both to trust-based philanthropy, for those of you that are new to this work, and then grounding on what it looks like from a community foundation perspective. We'll have some amazing panelists that'll talk about their journey and their experiences. We'll have some time for question and answers, and general reflection, and then we'll close out. But we want to open it up first with an introductory poll, just to understand where you all are in your trust-based journey. So I'll launch those polls. So yeah, how familiar are you with trust-based philanthropy? Maybe you're very familiar, you've been deep in this work, you've done the research, you've come to the workshops, webinars, or maybe this is your first time hearing of it and you just saw the webinar and decided to join us. And wherever you are, we're excited to have you here with us. And then we're also just curious if you attended the first session in this series. It's always helpful for us to understand where people are coming and how much we may need to give some grounding context before we dig into the continuation of that conversation. So I'm seeing a pretty even split for if people did go to the first session or if they didn't. And I'm seeing about 38% are very familiar and about 50% are somewhat familiar. Okay, I'll end this poll and share those results. Thank you for those of you that completed that. So we're seeing a good amount that are familiar, at least to some extent there. So thank you. But we also see those that aren't familiar or haven't heard of it at all. And so we do want to give a little bit of grounding context on what trust-based philanthropy is and what it looks like. So at its core, it's really a values-driven approach that seeks to address the inherent power imbalances between funders, nonprofits, and communities, where in conventional philanthropy, funders are holding a significant amount of the power and really seeks to right-size that power imbalance and lift up ways for funders to cede that power and lift up their nonprofits and build mutual relationships. It's centered on that belief that funders play a critical role in redistributing resources and power to advance that more equitable, healthier society. And so it encourages funders to do that work of redistributing power and resources. And it really flips the script on conventional philanthropy by prioritizing relationships and mutual learning over transactions and top-down accountability. So really right-sizing that and prioritizing the relationships between funders and grantees over this compliance-oriented philanthropic sector that we oftentimes see in our work. And again, if you aren't familiar with trust-based philanthropy, we have plenty of resources and information on our website. We encourage you to take a look at that to dig deeper into this word. But as I mentioned, it's a values-based approach. And while there's no one-size-fits-all for this work, there are some common values that trust-based funders are aligned with. And these include working for systemic equity, redistributing power, centering and prioritizing relationships, partnering in a spirit of service, which really looks at thinking about how as a funder you can partner and support your grantees and in their work, and a humble approach. It looks at mutual accountability, how funders should and can be accountable to their grantees and not just that one-way accountability of grantees being accountable to funders. And then embracing learning and building that learning culture where you embrace failure and see that as an opportunity to learn from one another. So these are just the values that trust-based funders align with, and we encourage you to check out. We have some resources on what this values-based approach means. And we encourage funders to consider how to embed their values across all of the dimensions of their work. So the 4 dimensions of trust-based philanthropy is a philosophy and it's a resource we have that really gets at this piece around how values should be tied to all of the dimensions of your work. Oftentimes when people hear about trust-based philanthropy, they go straight to the practices. Okay, how do I operationalize this? How do I check this off? But as you'll hear from our panelists later on in this conversation, it's important to consider ways to embed your values across the dimensions of your work, including your culture, your organization's culture, the structures and systems that are in place, and your leadership, as well as your practices. So with that really brief introduction to trust-based philanthropy, I'm gonna pass it off to my colleague and our esteemed leader, Shadi Salehi, to give a little bit more grounding before we jump into the conversation. Shadi.
Thank you, Shantias. Hello, everyone. So good to be with you. I am Shadi Salehi. I am the Executive Director of the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project. We're delighted to be partnering with the Iowa Council on Foundations and Philanthropy Northwest on this series. I am an Iranian woman with pale olive skin, long brown hair, and my little statement necklace that I'm wearing today. It's kind of a maroon necklace with gold beads, and I'm wearing a long sleeve black shirt and a blurred background. and I am joining you from the unceded land of the Ohlone people, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area. So as Shantius shared, we're here to really dig into the unique and critically important role that community foundations play in supporting communities to advance their vision for impact, to address the needs and opportunities facing our communities. We feel that as community foundation staff and consultants and allies, you play a very key role in advancing and addressing the most urgent and pressing needs that our communities face. So as kind of this intermediary role, we talked about this in our first session, just how that kind of critical intermediary role of redistributing funds, routing funds to essential needs in the community and various kind of issue areas and community groups and neighborhood associations. So given that critical hub role that community foundations play, we want to spend some time today really digging into what you all need in order to be able to build the trust and relationships that are essential to addressing the needs in the community. And because so much of conventional philanthropy has taken this direction of being quite donor-centric, it can distract and pull away community foundations from meeting the needs of the community. So today we're here to really get clear on what are the barriers to your ability to do so. What are some different ways to dream and imagine and approach relationships with donors and funders in order to allow for the trust and the relationship building that is really essential to advancing impact. Next slide, please. So as we're saying, you know, from a historical, traditional, conventional standpoint, community foundations have traditionally been very donor-centric. And this is not, you know, a surprise, or we know why, right? Because community foundations rely on the support of donors and funders in order to do the work that you do in most cases. So with trust-based philanthropy, we're really inviting a shift in the lens and the mindset, because trust-based philanthropy is ultimately about, like Shantius described, redistributing resources to allow for those who are closest to the issues in community to be able to have their own self-determined capability of addressing the needs in the community. So this is fundamentally a shift away from being donor-centric to being more community-centric. But that doesn't mean that, you know, donors don't have a role in this. Clearly, there's an important role that donors play in bringing access to resources that are needed to meet some of the needs and opportunities in our communities. And we believe that community foundations are uniquely positioned to really lean into this role as relationship brokers in the community and as community advocates. So we're going to take a moment to actually do another poll. So we'll go to the next slide, which will preview the poll. And just invite you all to reflect with us on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being very, very community-centric and 5 being very, very donor-centric. Where does your foundation land in your opinion? This is not really a scientific study. It's just kind of, where do you see yourself landing in the spectrum? Just so we can get a sense of how we're all entering into today's discussion. And Shantius, I'm not able to see the polls for some reason. So if you can read back what the results are, that would be really helpful.
Sure. So we have about, okay, I think the responses are slowing down. So I'll go ahead and end the poll. Let me see if I can share. Can you see it now?
No, unfortunately.
Okay. So I'll just share. So we have about 3% that say they're very community centric. We have, actually, if I do this, can you see it?
No, I don't know.
I put the thing on my shared screen. So we have about 30% that are community centric, 17%, 17% that aren't sure, and the majority is 46% that are donor centric and 3% that are very donor centric. So
Thank
um,
you. Thank
yeah.
you. So kind of a bell curve. So which is kind of what we expected, but leaning more toward donor centric, it sounds like. Thanks, Shantius.
Mhm.
Okay, so next slide, please. So today we're going to be kind of addressing, and when we say donors, we're talking about two broad categories here. We want to acknowledge that there's a range of funder and donor relationships that you may have. But generally, we're going to be talking about these two categories. So one is the institutional funders. These are the foundation grants, the government grants, the funder collaboratives that are funding your foundation to do a set amount of work or focus in on a particular issue area or project. Usually those institutional grants are time-bound. They're often tied to metrics, and they usually have some conventional reporting requirements. So we're going to acknowledge that and talk about that a little bit and how you can work in those constraints. And then there's this kind of bigger world of the donor advised funds, which of course have a much broader range of focus and purpose and relationships involved, and a range of different levels of engagement that donors may want to have in the community. So that's probably a much broader category where there's a lot more variance across how those relationships may operate. But generally what we're talking about here are that these are the funds from individuals routed through the community foundation, often for those individuals kind of donor, their main motivations of giving. These aren't necessarily time-bound. This can include donor circles. So we're going to be talking about both of these categories somewhat interchangeably, but there will be certain things that come up that will be specific to individuals or institutions. So if you have a question or a comment about either of these categories, we welcome you to call it out specifically if it's helpful, if it is relevant to how you to your question. So really, the thing that we're here to unpack today is really how can community foundations take more ownership of advocating for the community's needs? And there was a question raised in the chat about, okay, is trust-based philanthropy the same as community-centric? And you'll hear us refer to community-centric throughout today's discussion. And part of it is that we want to lean into the role that community foundations play in the community and as relationship brokers in the community. But there are a lot of aligned values with community-centric giving and trust-based philanthropy. The most kind of shared value is in trusting the vision and the leadership of those who are doing the work and working directly in community and closest to the issues that we seek to address. And that's one of the core values of a trust-based approach that is aligned with community-centric. Trust-based philanthropy also includes a range of concrete practices, such as multi-year unrestricted funding and streamlined processes that we see as strategies to alleviate the power imbalances that exist between funders, nonprofits, and communities. So just kind of broadly recognize that this is the core value that we're going to be really leaning into in today's discussion. I should also note that no one has actually totally figured out this question of how can we engage donors and funders from a community foundation standpoint. How can we get them to get on board with trust-based philanthropy? This is still an active question that is in exploration. And our speakers today will share examples of ways they're thinking differently, ways they're making strides in conversations with donors, and what are the internal requirements that we need to actually address at the cultural level, at the structural level, to enable us to be able to be more focused on meeting the priorities of the community. So we invite you today in an exploratory and aspirational and hopefully inspirational discussion where we can meditate on this question. How can community foundations take more ownership of advocating for the community's needs? And why is this ultimately important to advancing impact? So with that, I am delighted to introduce our speakers for today, representing community foundations from various parts of the country that have been actively interrogating this question. Pamela Ross is Vice President of Community Leadership and Equitable Initiatives at the Indianapolis Foundation, and we're also so honored to have her as a steering committee member of the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project. Patricia Mejia, Vice President of Community Engagement and Impact at the San Antonio Area Foundation. Zooming in from a library on the road, she has graciously taken a break during her vacation to join us today. And Marisa Magallanes, Vice President of Strategy and Equity at Albuquerque Community Foundation. Welcome, Marisa. And hopefully we can get Patricia up with us shortly. Yay, there she is. Great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to take the slides down and we're going to get into it with our speakers. And I just want to start out with each of the three of you sharing a little bit of context on your community foundation, your community, the size of your grant making and the structure of your organization. So just generally grant making budget, just so folks have some of that context. And start us out by sharing with us from your philosophy. What do you see as the fundamental role of a community foundation? So let's start with you, Pamela, sharing a bit about the Indianapolis Foundation and what you see as the role of a community foundation.
Sure. Thank you, Shadi. So hello, everyone. My name is Pamela Ross. I have been with the Indianapolis Foundation I'm in my 7th year. I have been in a vice president role for about 5.5 of those years. I started as a program officer. And so my previous background for all of my career was in community-based organizations. So coming to the Indianapolis Foundation was really my first space in philanthropy. So really, Indianapolis Foundation is 100 years old. So the structures and the systems and the practices were very grounded, as they are in philanthropy anyway. Our endowment size, I don't know about other foundations, but I mean, within the context of my team, which includes 10 individuals, 6 of which are program officers, they are managing multiple funds. We have major funds. They're managing several different types of funds that we have within the Indianapolis Foundation endowment. But as far as our unrestricted funds solely, that's about $8 million each year. So that doesn't include donor advised funds or anything like that, which they also help to support. We changed our mission after 100 years. In 2018, we changed our mission to have a focus on creating more equity within our community and also putting a real strong stake in the ground around our role in dismantling systemic racism, recognizing that the systems are really a major factor in opportunity. So no matter how much philanthropy, philanthropic efforts go into this, somehow we need to start to look at how are the systems keeping people from having the opportunities that we keep investing in. So, my philosophy coming in had strong community-based ties. So I came into this as far as already focusing on how do we hear from the community? How do we create those relationships? And definitely from the power dynamic, having been somebody who was on the other side of this, I really wanted to understand what is the secret sauce of getting a yes when you submit a proposal. So looking at that too, very strongly, what are the power dynamics? We're very focused on listening to the community. And so the authentic relationships, centering and focusing on how are we distributing our power in power spaces, but how are we also sharing the power? And then definitely embracing our learning. There's no way that you talk about there's not any blueprint of how to engage donors in TBP. There's definitely not a blueprint to dismantling systemic racism. So if we're not willing to be a learning institution, then we definitely fall behind. So it's been quite a ride and just really honored to even be a part of TBP and definitely on the steering committee. I hope I answered your question, Shadi.
That was great.
I might have lost.
Yeah, no, that was great. And we'll come back and unpack some of that in a minute. Thank you. Patricia, welcome. Thank you for being with us. can you share with us a little bit more about you, your role at the San Antonio Area Foundation, and what do you see as the fundamental role of community foundations?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this conversation. It's such a critical one, so I'm really grateful and want to start that way. I have personally, I always start my introductions of being raised by a single mom who understood the injustices of the world and therefore just transferred that over to me. Professionally, I spent half of my career as a nonprofit executive doing things from asset development really across the country, building a national organization, and then doing some local philanthropic work for the second part of my career. I've now been in philanthropy for about 10 years and with the Area Foundation for about 5. Just to give a little bit of context about the foundation, we are in San Antonio in the center of Texas. We're about 7th largest city in the country. We have about $1 billion assets. We give out about 60 million a year. My responsibility is around, the title doesn't really say much, it's around strategy and equity and really our discretionary grant making. Discretionary of that 60 million is about 15 to 20 dependent on the year. We too have had a big shift in the way that we look at our work over the past 5 years, where we really tried to center work continuously, very similar to Pam, turned ourselves into a learning organization, recognizing that there is no blueprint for most of this work, whether it's on the granting side or the larger systemic issues. And so we really tried very hard to change our approach. And part of that other context setting means that we've completely changed anything that we can. And I say that very, very lightly, but very honestly. Anything we can get our hands on, we've really started to ask the questions. Why are we doing this? Is there some real legal reason as to why we are? And then if it's not, let's figure out something different. And part of one of the things I'm most proud about is that we've really taken some time to change who's on the grant making staff. And those folks are individuals who have lived experience, either from diverse backgrounds, growing up in poverty, just depends on the staff person. But the other part that I think that's really interesting is each of them has spent time on the nonprofit side. And so they come to the work with the idea that there is no other way to do this other than centering community. That's really critical. And maybe the last thing that I'll close with is really also spending time working with the board. And I might push a little bit on some of the topics that really it's kind of helping to use trust-based philanthropy in a way, using that language to give individuals credit for what they had been doing as an introduction into a more radical way of doing trust-based philanthropy. And we can talk more about that as we get into the questions. But again, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you lifting that up, because trust-based philanthropy often gets associated with these practices, but really what we are talking about is a radical shift in philosophy and a rethinking of a lot of the structures and hierarchies that have really come to be status quo. So thank you for noting that, and we will come back to that. Marisa, welcome. Can you please share more about your role at Albuquerque Community Foundation and how you see the role of community foundations?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Marisa Magallanes. I use she, her pronouns. I'm happy to be here with all of you. I've been born and raised in New Mexico my whole life, and came into the Albuquerque Community Foundation 4 years ago from nonprofit work. I spent a lot of time in arts administration and a significant amount of time in fundraising. And when I came into philanthropy in the Community Foundation, I had a bit of culture shock, as I'm sure many of you did. And I thought, oh, this is how it works. Okay. So it took me a little while to figure that out. And it felt like a big veil was lifted, being a fund seeker for so many years. So my role, I lead our strategy and our equity work here at the foundation, and really looking at how we operationalize equity, how we shift all of our work to be more focused on systemic causes, and thinking really upstream in our work. I would say that in terms of what is most fundamental, coming into the Albuquerque Community Foundation, which is about 40 years old, we're about 140 million in assets. We do about $7 million in grant making a year and only have about $200,000 in discretionary funds, which has led us to have to develop partners with other types of those institutional funders where we can have big influence. So that's been a strategy of ours, but certainly felt the resistance to be in the middle of the most complex issues facing our community, and thought, okay, we're just going to play it safe, kind of standing on the outside and getting involved here and there, but we're just going to be neutral. And I think that if I could describe our biggest philosophical change and the fundamental need of community foundations is to be in the middle of the most complex issues and really changing the way we mobilize our resources, use all the resources available to us as a community foundation, and particularly get involved in public policy and advocacy work.
Wow. So I hope you all can see why we brought these speakers in today, because all three of you have been part of leading change at your foundations, pushing the envelope beyond what the conventions are in order to make change, in order to center the needs of the community. And sometimes that comes with difficult conversations with donors, or doing things that donors may not like, or may have a lot of skeptical questions about. So I wanted to spend a little time kind of reflecting with you all about that. What is it like? What do leaders need to keep in mind as at community foundations when instituting changes that center the needs of the community? What do you have to hold when it comes to the relationships with donors and or the board? What's in your mind? How did you approach some of the conversations that came up? And this is just open to anyone who's moved to share. What did you have to kind of competencies and skills or just mindset things did you have to rely on in order to hold the world of leading change for your community and managing some of the power dynamics with donors? And Patricia, I see you unmuted. Please share.
Yeah, I think this is such a fantastic piece of the conversation. I think I think Marisa, you kind of made me giggle when you go through culture shock of joining the other side. I feel like one of the things that I feel like has been so helpful to me personally is hold the truth that I held in community before I came to the philanthropic side to still be true, which is that we have to meet community where they are. And while that is a very different conversation when working with donors or board members, that reality is so true in making systemic change. So if we're able to hold that truth to be real in organizing, right? So you knock at someone's door, you're helping to mobilize them to register to vote. I'm speaking as a nonprofit person, or you're wanting them to join a promotora, community health worker program. You in your heart believe that you have to meet them where they're at, whatever constraints they have on them. So to use that same philosophy on the donor and board side to say, what has their life experience been like that is different, or that is precluding them from being able to see trust-based philanthropy or community-centered philanthropy different than I? And then to have the patience to walk alongside what that means. And I'll give a real specific example. And I don't say this with rose-tinted glasses. That is very difficult to do on a daily basis. Someone once mentioned to me that the task or the toll that it takes, particularly on women of color who are in philanthropy, on our bodies just to hold that space. I want to recognize that and not say that as if it's so easy. But one specific example, we had, as you all unfortunately might have heard, there was a mass shooting at a school. We've now had two very close to San Antonio, but this one was about a year ago in the small community of Uvalde. And one of the things that, like many issues, whether it was a shooting or not, some traditional donors want to jump right in and do exactly what it is that they feel is the right solution. And I was sharing earlier that one of the challenges we had, really wanting to create a space where we gathered as much money to help that hurting community as possible, as quickly as possible. But at the same time, really use the opportunity to raise the awareness. I hate to say educate, to raise the awareness, to sit in the space of that donor who believes that they have the right solution for what that community or how that money should land in that community in crisis. So really sitting down and having very direct, oftentimes difficult, oftentimes I thought I might lose my job. That's a very true story. By holding the truth that their way or implementation into dollars in that community may not be the only way. And so when you ask the question about what is the role, I think it's to hold that truth that there is something different and recognize it's not necessarily a fault per se of a donor. We could have a whole different conversation about whether that's chosen ignorance or not. I would like to believe that many people come to this wanting to do the best thing. This particular donor is a very, very large donor of ours and wanted just to give into the money right away to a specific cause that he believed was going to make a difference in that community. And the conversation that I had to have was to say, this unfortunately has happened across the country. And here's the lessons that we've learned from community foundations across the country, that it's not just the immediate, that the damage that will be caused will have long-term implications. And we need to figure out a plan for both immediate and long-term. While that's just one example, I want to highlight that and just to kind of really dive into the conversation, that it's not easy. It's not one conversation, it's multiple conversations. It's a lot of pain that you might take home and frustration. But in the end, I believe that there's slow shifts that happen, not overnight, but they do happen, where you begin to have him think, or in this case, it was a male, to say, you know what, there might be something else to learn from another community that's been in this situation. And so it wasn't a miraculous conversation. He still used half of the money to do what he was hoping to do, but the other half he held back for future investment or what the community needed years from now. So just a quick example, but I'm trying to get at it as best as I can.
Thank you, Patricia, for sharing such a powerful and important example. And I think there's a couple of things in what you shared I want to lift up. One, clearly that you are reinforcing your role as the kind of advocate for the community, kind of prioritizing the needs of the community, but also what you noted about the foundation having done its homework to connect with other community foundations about how they have responded to communities that have experienced similar tragedies. And that's yet another example of that, what we call it doing the homework in the trust-based framework. It's also support beyond the check and thinking about, let's respond and let's learn from those who have experienced this, because unfortunately, this is a reality in our country that happens daily. So there's others out there who have experienced this and can help us navigate this and help us be, trusted, supporters of this community. And then holding all of that against this, this power imbalance donor relationship, and having to manage and hold all that and still prioritize the needs of the community takes a lot of, it's bold yet necessary. So thank you for sharing that. I think it gives all of us permission to, even in those moments when it's kind of, when you're confronted with that kind of intense power imbalance, to remember that the goal is in supporting the needs of the community. And just thank you for acknowledging that this takes real emotional labor. It has physical manifestations, particularly for women of color that are really, advocating for communities that we are of and from. So thank you for that. I want to bring this also to you, Pamela and Marisa, just this notion of like, in your jobs, you have to have these difficult donor conversations, and it's challenging, but necessary. Do either of you have stories or examples that you want to share of times you've had to have those kind of tough conversations with donors, and how did that go?
Yeah, I do have an example, but I wanted to go back, if it's okay, for one quick second and tie in how, when we're getting ready to have these conversations and we're grappling that and, talking through it with the team, how critical from a foundation perspective it is to address the internal, deeply ingrained cultural aspects of power imbalance, of fear, of scarcity, because I think that if we're not doing that work internally as an organization, getting external to those donor conversations is almost impossible. And I also think our foundation's 42 years old. I'm the first woman of color, person of color to be in executive leadership in our foundation. And we've made great efforts to diversify our staff. And so it weighs deeply on me as I think about how we are empowering and what our staff see, especially the women of color on our staff, for me to stand up in this leadership role and support the foundation, standing up for its values, standing up for community, and not being afraid to have those conversations. I think there's just such a tie there for, all of the work that we're doing to diversify our organization so it reflects the community we serve. And then being able to really be a role model and address my own fear. So, I can hopefully encourage and inspire, the team around me to do the same, and how critical that is. I think you talked about being a relationship broker. I think it's also a values broker. Because I think where we've had experiences is seeing folks who really want to support, a particular organization, and we know that donor is not values aligned with that organization, and being able to have those conversations and say, internally, yes, there's resources, and yes, it's money, but what is at stake and what is the potential harm, and having to have open conversations with the organizations, knowing deeply enough, having our relationships with the organizations to understand that conflict may be apparent between that donor and that organization, and then having those conversations to redirect the funding in some cases to a different organization where the values misalignment isn't going to cause more harm than the resources might provide support. So I think those are some of the experiences that we've had.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those reflections, Marisa. Pamela, I know you too have that probably resonates with you and your experience, particularly in the work that you've been doing at Indianapolis Foundation to push for a more racial equity, racial justice focused approach in the community, to shift practices that can reflect that. How have you thought about the way how have you held those worlds and of being that values broker in relation to some of these issues that may come up with donors?
I mean, the values are what I've always said, we have to lead with our values. That to me disrupts the conversation, or at least distracts it from the issue around race, because there is alignment in values. And what it typically is not brought forward is within your values that you have and what you want to see in the community, if we can help support, bring you along in, if I don't use educate, Tricia, but I mean, helping you learn, just like we've been learning. Here are some disparities. You're passionate about a certain aspect of the population, whether it's education or youth development or any space, arts and culture. There's still going to be disparities in all these spaces. That's just part of the story. So how do we align what we believe to be what our values are with where your values are? Because everybody goes through a values exercise, and in determining where they want to, how they want to invest their philanthropic efforts. And then you start to have the conversation. I think that no matter whether it's with donors or the community, we have to not lead with money, because that is not a relationship broker or a relationship glue. That is something that is very transactional. So no matter if it's in our grant making, through our endowment funds, or it's working with donors, it's how are you developing some relational value in this that will continue beyond the check will be something that will be sustainable and that you can actually share. And so, you know, I'll just say now, Shadi, I know that maybe that you may bring this up later, but I mean, we've lost donors for sure in our work. We've lost donors and who have been explicit about why. They don't believe in our mission and they don't believe in what we're doing and they don't want to be attached to that, even if they can still invest in the way that they want to invest. But what we have found is by being explicit that about where we would like to see transformation and where we like to disrupt power and how we like to embrace community and elevate the abundance and the assets of community, not just how you can come in and fill needs of community, because community is doing what they can do. Our role is to come alongside and help fulfill a greater level of scaling and capacity. We've also have a fund called Equity Partners. And within that fund, we have gotten more hundreds of thousands of dollars that come in each year to support our work. So when we look at our endowment side, which seems to be the major factor, and I didn't elevate that in like describing the Indianapolis Foundation, but I mean, our collective is $1 billion. But when you can get away from your asset size to actually, what are we investing each year? Like, by us being explicit, we've brought more donors in. They may not be necessarily donors setting up funds, but we have more donors who are interested in what we're doing, who would then, whether they do set up an additional fund or not, they are investing in our yearly operational needs to do the work that we're doing. So there is two sides and it is tough. And I agree, last thing I'll say, I disagree with Marisa that it is that you have to have that internal structure. You have to have the right people in your seats. And congratulations to you, I guess, maybe somewhat, Marisa, that you are the first. There, these things of why we still have first is a whole indicator of what is still the problem, But it is a space that is difficult to hold. And I appreciate it also being named that when you are a person of color, when you definitely are women of color who are carrying a lot, this is an emotional labor. This no longer becomes a job. It is something that you are attached to, your identity is attached to, and you have to really work hard to not take home those kinds of things that are placed upon you in your essence of trying to be an advocate for the community, that you don't take those home with you so that you can come back again the next day. Because one space where power is very evident is with our donors.
Thank you, Pamela. There's so much in there that I want to unpack with all three of you. I want to particularly address this point about the internal structure. And also just this notion of, and this is also a cultural piece too, getting okay with losing some donors and knowing that closing those doors will and can open up new doors for new donors. So not always thinking about the measure of success as how many donors you have, actually maybe not thinking about that as a measure of success. And again, really thinking about what's needed to support the community's needs. But let's get into this internal structure thing, because all three of you have noted the emotional labor, what this takes a toll on you as leaders. Of course, you need that structural and cultural support internally that may or may not always be there. But I'd love to spend a little time to think about what are some kind of structural considerations that people in leadership positions at community foundations should be thinking about in order to support leaders who want to take a more community-centered approach, want to take a more trust-based approach. What structural considerations need to be in place? And I'd love to get super practical in this. I think, Marisa, you were pointing out, there's been a move to hire more people who are from the community. That could be one. But I'd love to hear just a reflection from all three of you. And maybe, Patricia, we'll start with you since we haven't heard from you in a minute. What should community foundations be thinking about internally in order to make this work kind of successful and effective externally?
Well, that's a huge question. And maybe the easiest answer is blow it up. When I started off by saying there is some value in kind of allowing people to see that some of what that has been done traditionally is trust-based. So let me just give a specific example. So, you know, there might be a donor, X donor comes in and gives to their university $100,000, and there's no restrictions on that. And that's very, very common across all community foundations, right? But it's because they believe they have that relationship. They trust that that institution is going to do what they believe is best because they had a positive experience. So I can't speak for all, but I know one of the things that we've done is we've tried to, as often as we can, go back to what Pam suggests, I think Marisa did as well. The values are there. They're just not necessarily for members of community that they do not have contact with or relationship with. So when I talk about blowing it all up, I really mean, and the thing that I'm proudest of, if I were to win the lottery tomorrow and get to continue this road trip that I've been on, I would love, you know, for the entire staff, not just those in grant making, but those that are in executive positions, those are in finance positions, have lived experience, because it changes how they show up to work every single day. It's not a conversation. It's not, you know, I've been really lucky to have have worked with two CFOs who came to this work with a nonprofit kind of centering of their mind, and it changed how they did things. You know, if I think about what else is necessary, you know, it's the obvious things. Like that also has to be reflective in the board. We have to have people who are willing to take risks to do things differently. For example, if we talk about something that Pam mentioned, you know, if we change the measure of success, not just how much money we sit on, but how are we leveraging that money in a way that's different? You know, if I was able to be in charge of the world tomorrow, I would love to invest in community rather than in the market, right? So there's nonprofits who are looking to buy their own buildings. I would love to use our money in that way. I think so much of what has been said of just completely drastically changing and questioning every single operation, every single thing that we're doing. How are we giving money? Who is our caterer? Where is our facility? Who cleans and how much do they get paid? What is our lowest paid staff? To use those values that we espouse to and that we say we always have wanted to be and make them to be true. And that is much easier said than done. But maybe I'll close up by saying this. Because it's so centered to me, and particularly because I'm on a road trip, I'm taking my own advice. I've been on a road trip for 2 weeks now with my little one, my 5-year-old, and I've been holding space for my team to say that it is true to be a mom and to be an employee and to create change at the same time. And I also genuinely believe that this work requires more of women of color than anyone else. And so what that means, because we are the caretakers of our communities, if we take on this challenge in community, and particularly as it connects with donors, we have to take the time to care for ourselves. Even though, Pam, I would love to turn it off every day, I can't until I'm in the mountains, 5 days in the mountains with no internet, and then it works. So, you know, I probably said way more than the question, but as I've shared with you before, Shadi, this is really for me a healing opportunity to share with others and to be authentic about how difficult this work is in the world of philanthropy. That's for sure.
Well, we thank you. We really appreciate you for that. Really, really powerful insights about, and some really concrete recommendations, changing measures of success, increasing the representation among staff and board, questioning, you know, really asking why, because that often so much of what happens in our systems and structures haven't really been questioned. They've just been done that way for a long time. Thank you for those really powerful insights. Pamela and Marisa, do you have other reflections coming up for you as you heard Patricia addressing some of these points? And I also want to bring in this other question around development staff and the role of development staff. So however you want to answer it, we'll dig into the development staff question also, but want to make some space for you two to reflect on what Patricia shared or other things that are coming up for you both.
I'll take the easier part, Patricia. Because you work closer with donors then, but I think from your original question, like everything you said, Patricia, is like really huge. Like it's so huge. It's like all these things that are not on a resume is what you should be looking for in your staff. Some things related to previous experience in community and all of that. But I think that this work requires a lot of nimbleness. It requires so much of an essence of patience. And are you a relationship broker? My team, we're not grant makers. We are holders of relationships. And that means like relationships, not just with us, between us and the community, but between our own stakeholders, our city. We act as a mediator. We have a $45 million grant, federal, the ARPA funds that recently came to, and we stretched them as far as they stretched us because those started with, they had to be reimbursable. And I'm like, not on my watch. We're not about to say we want to fund grassroots organizations and make it reimbursable. And so this stretch, so we have to act as that mediator. So what does that require of the staff? Well, one, they need to trust me that I'm going to have their back, whether it's internally or externally, that I'm going to get in the work with them. But it's a different kind of dynamic if you really look what program officers, what leadership has looked like and all of that. It does need to be disrupted, or in the words of Patricia, it needs to be blown up or something of that sort, in the way that you just change the whole dynamic, because it's not the same work. You can't have a different language. So that's really one of the biggest things. We talk about this in the steering committee. It's like you have a lot of people, a lot of foundations saying they're adopting trust-based philanthropy, but you're really not. So you can't say one thing, look like the same thing, operate like the same thing, and then say we're not the same thing. Like that's not going to work, especially now, because there is a power movement on the ground, and we are going to more and more need an answer to that. And so once you've opened your mouth and you've set some things out into your marketing world and you've said a few things, now we all just need to understand now we're on the hook. And so people are actually looking for results, and their outcomes don't look like our outcomes. So we may have some outcomes that we think this will be our receipts for how well we've done. But the community is the one who says that really you've made a difference. And so, it is the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to my colleague here to get more specific about the donors is that I always say we're like our best experiment. And if you're not willing to be the experiment that you want to see in the community, then again, don't do it. Because if you're not willing to disrupt your own organization, you're not willing to put your own self on the hook for some of these things, you're not willing to have those hard conversations and to hire, diverse, lived experiences, love that, then don't push that out. And I think that's the thing. When we get into hard conversations, I'm like, well, why are we asking as if we're not that? Like we are a part of the community. And if we're not representative of the community, then we need to shake some things up, because we can't ever really get real if we look different than community. And then that brings into bear those difficult decisions and conversations. And especially if you're sharing and shifting power within your organization, you still have a hierarchy, you still have structure. And that's one of the other, misbeliefs is that somehow if, tight means, I don't know what it means. I mean, I have things going through my head that I won't do today, Shadi, but I mean, it doesn't make sense, and so tight, you can still have structure, you can still be very intentional, and you can still be very nimble and effective, and things don't have to always just look exactly the same. And that is what has to be shaken up in philanthropy, is if you're going to be relevant, especially as a community foundation, then you got to shake some things up, and you decide where you have the gaps and continue to learn. But it shouldn't look the same. And if you're saying we're the same, then I respect you more. Just say that. Just say you're the same, and then we'll keep it moving.
Thank you, Pamela. We're right with you. Everything you're saying. I mean, that was really, really important points to lift up, and it reminds me of one of the problems that we often articulate to make the case for trust-based philanthropy is that values practice disconnect that is quite common in philanthropy, where, you know, a philanthropy institution or a donor will say they stand for a certain set of values, but then the way that they're showing up isn't reflective of those values. And Pamela, you raised the word that I want to lift, one of the words that I want to lift up from what you shared is relevant. And if community foundations want to remain relevant and continue to be relevant, it requires that kind of receptiveness to the community and the community's needs and priorities and where the community sees opportunity. Otherwise, you can lose relevance. So I think there's like this key piece there that is so essential to a community foundation's ability to do its work well, that has been so heavily influenced by donors in the past, that is actually degrading the relevance of some community foundations. So thank you so much for lifting that piece up. I want to bring a question to you, Marisa. When we were preparing for today's conversation, we talked about the toll that this takes on development staff. And when we're talking about shifting conversations with donors, what are the needs of the development staff? How do we need to think about the competencies and experiences of development staff? And how can we support them better in having these kind of holding these relationships that are often very, very power imbalanced when you're dealing with those who have a lot of wealth, a lot of expectations. Maybe they've done it a certain way forever and not willing to listen to a development staff person, especially if that development staff person doesn't look and talk like them. So Marisa, share with us a little bit about some of your reflections on the role of development staff, especially as you've been thinking about evolving the way you approach the staffing at ACF.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to say first and foremost that we're, you know, I've spent a lot of time in fundraising, mostly on the nonprofit side, but I also started my career at ACF in development. And donors can cause harm. They can cause harm. They do cause harm to development staff. And if we must normalize talking about it, checking in with our development staff, and being able to interrupt when we see microaggressions, sexism, racism, classism, because it creates such an inherent tension and conflict with our efforts to recruit and build and maintain staff that reflect the community we serve, as we may not always acknowledge the harm that we are putting those very people that we want to build and reimagine the vision and the role of a community foundation in the way of. And so I think that is an imperative internal support that we're aspiring to do more of, and to check in with our staff and just make it a normal process after a donor meeting, after somebody's talking about grant distributions with the DAF, holder. How was it? Anything happen? Do you need support? Do you need a space to process? I wouldn't say that we've had that practice at ACF, but I think, knowing my own experiences as a fundraiser, especially as a young woman, that things that happen and I went through, I would have appreciated that and been able to feel okay talking about that. But again, when we think about that power balance, the scarcity mindset, sometimes the fear, we don't bring those things up. And so we must create cultures where it's okay. And leadership is checking in with our development staff, our community impact staff, if they're relating with donor, advised fund holders. And again, this is not all donors, but it is a real impact that can cause great harm to our staff.
Thank you so much. Patricia, Pamela, anything to add? Yes, Patricia.
Just really quickly, I think if we look at the research, and sorry that it's not the top of my head at this moment, but I feel like just donors in general, if we're not talking about moving systems or anything like that, you can't move them. If I remember correctly, it's like 60% of them are going to have their decision, really on where their funds are going to go. And maybe it's my just view of the world that I kind of have to leave some things up to the creator, right? Like I want to focus on those that we can actually move. And so I wonder if that's also part of this conversation, of thinking about strategy. If the reality is, and sorry that this statistic, I can't really say that it's actually true. I haven't looked it up in a while, but let's just say it's about 60% are going to give to the same university, or they're going to give to a nonprofit that helped, that they know of a friend of a friend. Okay, that's that. But that leaves a 40% that does have the possibility, if we can have their values align and see the expertise in the staff. I think that's been one of the shifts, whether it's on donor team or the grants team or whatever team it's on, is shifting that the expertise might lie outside themselves. And have people who are willing to do that. I think Pam mentioned, that many donors left when that conversation started. That is true for us as well. I don't know how many. There were a couple who had very difficult conversations with some of our development staff. But the other is true as well, that so much money came in because they've been waiting for a community foundation to broaden their definition. So to your original question that you had for us is like, what is the role of a community foundation or fundamental role? For me, it's to broaden that definition of who is community and who do we listen to make decisions. And if we can shift even that in that 40% of those who are willing to engage in that conversation, and assume that the other 60 are not doing particularly harm, they're not funding things that are like hate groups or other things like that. Let them continue to do that. But with the 40 that we might have a chance with and who are willing to engage in that conversation, see the expertise of the staff, I want to roll with those, right? I really want to influence however that happens. And I think for us, one of the challenges that we've had is really spending more time. It took our team some time to be like, oh my God, we really are center to the work. If we sit and have conversations with the development team, we sit and have conversations with the finance team, what does that look like to be in relationship, to move from transactional to transformational? And again, kind of one of the points I started off with earlier is meeting them where they're at. They themselves may not have necessarily ever been engaged in nonprofit work before, to no fault of their own, just how their career path took them, but really to engage in the conversation that you are central. Every single email that you exchange with a donor or you exchange with a nonprofit partner is powerful. To explain that idea of power dynamic is also new to some of our own team members. But I think it's to also be honest with ourselves about, if this were easy work, or if as Pam mentioned earlier, playbook, there would be no injustice in the world, right? And there isn't. There is, and there's systems in place, and we just have to be able to focus on what we have the ability to change. And whatever is within our power, and we question what is in our power every single day, though I believe, the optimist in me believes that shifting, there's serious changes happening just by asking those questions.
That is, oh yes, Pamela, please.
Sorry, I'm shouting just real quick. I just want to hone in more on several things that Marisa has said, is that, you want to get into trust-based philanthropy, you want to get into racial equity, but we too often look at it like, what are we going to do outside of these walls? The real work is internal. The real work is internal. And when you start bringing people into spaces where they start to feel unsafe, they start to feel devalued, they start to see themselves differently than they came in the door, it's going the wrong way. And a lot of times either you see it and you ignore it because you already have an agenda of this is what we got to do as an institution. And we're still fight this. So I'm not saying this is not an expert space. Look, we still are dealing with issues. And I don't think that will change until there really is a long-term commitment where you seem like we've been doing this for 20 years, 25 years, 30, and even then you still got to remain relevant. But I just wanted to go back to that because when you talk about individuals not having, especially across the board, but definitely I just feel your heart when you're saying that there's not space, for people to be able to process and to express what they're feeling at work. Because what you're doing is I'm being harmed at work, and I want to talk about it at work too. I want some accountability around the essence of the work you're asking me to do is not just go cultivate donors and their wishes. You're asking me to cultivate a new culture, a new way of thinking about things, and bring in my identity at the same time. You have now you've hired me to do something more than what can possibly be captured on my resume. So everything from compensation, really looking at how you're compensating your staff. When you go into this, it is very, very internally intensive. And I think that too often that's not what's looked at, is what is this going to change into our internal dynamic? And what do we need to do to create the fertile ground? How do we create the culture? That means that we may have to, people are getting paid to learn on the job. They're getting paid to learn what these things look like. And it takes time. And as institutions, we don't want to take time for that. Like, that's not work. And until it's embraced that, like, actually, no, that is work. And I always say to my team, like, if you think that what you are doing is reviewing proposals, administering grant dollars, doing your due diligence out in the community, then you have the wrong job description. That's not the one I give you. Our job in here is for you are coming in as an organizer, you're coming in as an activist, you're coming in as a professional, you're coming in as an expert in your area of focus. And I just think, especially when you're dealing with donors, you have to give the staff the opportunity to deal with, to express, and to strategize around the harm that sometimes is often caused in those spaces, because they are being really courageous. They are being really courageous. And I don't think that that's honored as much and given the space, definitely as much as it should, including mental health days, not vacation days, mental health days. How do you take care of individuals who are willing to get into space and really be courageous and really move the work forward?
I just kind of giggled really quick, Pam, at something that you said, because you're talking about all the values that team members bring in with lived experience, right? That aren't on a typical job description, but what drive the work forward. We're in an internal conversation about, looking at salary comparisons across community foundations, and it just makes me giggle. I mean, the only thing I can do at this point is laugh, because you're comparing someone who brings so much more to it because they've been an organizer, because they've been an activist, and they still are, right, in a different role. And you're looking at their salary comparison to someone who just gives out grants. And that's not the right salary comparison. So at every level, I just had to laugh at this point, because I think about that, even in my own salary negotiations. Yeah, you can pay me what you would like to, but that's not what you're getting. You're not getting a VP of grants in comparison. So obviously it's kind of personal for me, because I think there's so many levels of this conversation that we kind of don't create space to talk about. And it's so important. So thank you both, all three of you. This has just been such a great conversation.
I agree. And we are coming close to the end of our time. And I want to make some space, one, to reflect. One thing that is just really strong, like clearly coming out of all three of your comments. And that's really around the kind of that 4 dimensions framework that Shantias shared at the beginning of this conversation. This work requires the internal work at the culture level, at the structures level, at the leadership level. It's not just about grant making practices. That's one piece, and it has to be handled internally, and that's ongoing work. And the other thing that's coming out really loud and clear is just the clarity of values that drive all three of your roles and your leadership and your organizations. And I want to bring this back to a question, because the clarity of values are what help you make decisions, or what help you have those conversations about the need to invest internally in culture. There's so much there. And there's a question that came up that I think comes back to this notion of living your values when it comes to donor relationships. And I want to, I'm just going to read the question and invite anyone who's moved to share. So as your foundation makes it, how do your foundations, as you get clear on your values, how do you make it explicit what is acceptable and what's not acceptable when it comes to donors? At what point do you walk away? And how do you make that clear across foundations when you're making those decisions? And so there's additional questions like, do you research donors? Like, what's the process of assessing the fit with donors? Is there a list of unacceptable, like deal breaker donor behaviors that you have or consider? Any examples that anyone can share on how you made a decision on a time where you had to walk away from a prospective donor or had to have a tough conversation about whether or not they were a fit? I know there's a lot baked in it. Yes, Marisa.
I'll start off. I'll just jump in because we just did a values, mission, vision update. It's been a year-long process, very intentional. And we're real-time dealing with the first time we're deeply looking at the relationship. And so maybe I'll come back next year and tell you how that went. But what I want to say more to those of you who are in a very beginning state, right? You know, Pam and Patricia, you both talked about losing donors. We haven't gone through that yet, but it's okay. And I can tell you, like, going through it real time right now of how do we align our values to this request and you know, really working through that. Take time, clear your schedules, give yourself space to think, process, come back, and don't be afraid. And I'll let you know how our process turns out, because again, we're babies at this, but it feels good to show up for the values, the vision, and the mission that our team works so hard to create and act in accordance with them, not, you know, just have them be words on paper that don't have real meaning. So just take the time.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, maybe we'll be back next summer with some updates. Stay tuned. Thank you for that. Pamela or Patricia? Yes, Patricia, anything that you want to share on this question?
Just real quickly, I think you know, we do follow. You know, I'm a big fan of peer pressure. So if other cool foundations are doing things, I'm very quick to say, do you see that this other foundation is doing? And so that's how we got some of the things like, you know, the anti-hate policy, so that there are some, you know, hard rules where if someone is coming in to support, we will not do that. But the truth is that I don't know that we structurally are where we should be at to ensure that there is, even with that policy in place, that all of our investments go to areas of greatest need. That is an honest statement. But what I will say is it continues to go back to this question of just creating a space of asking us what we're afraid of. I'm going to give a real specific example. We had, as you know, just our physical location, we had a large amount of migrant children come in. There still are, but this is about 2 years ago. And I went to the board to ask for some investment. And there was a board member who, it was a partnership with the city to create a migrant resource center, said, you know, I don't know, it's a highly political thing. I don't know if we should do it. And the question that I stated back to them, along with many others, but for sake of the time, I just said, what if we don't? And I think that continues to go back, whether obviously policy in place is the best, having staff to implement that and they know those things are wrong at a gut and will push back. But I think it's consistently asking why. So there was an assumption. So I said, so who are we afraid of? So if there's this donor that we're talking about, can we name them? And there was silence because no one wants to say that. And so it goes back to some earlier points about really forcing folks to live into their values. I will not allow a space for us in my time at the Community Foundation. I will not allow us to be afraid of something that we cannot name. If we are willing to say X donor is not going to give to us, then let's put that at the table. And let's say we are making a decision on thousands of people's lives because of X donor, and having that transparent space. I, again, thought I might lose my job, but heck, that's what you're there for, right? Is to say, I want to know, who are you afraid of? And we should be afraid of the opposite. We should be afraid of those who no longer have trust in the Community Foundation because we've taken that fear stance for so long.
Yes, yes. I am so struck by this conversation because it is clear the passion and commitment that you all bring to this work and the emotional and mental sacrifices that takes. So I wish all of you some mental health time and all the things and all the wellness and the rest and all the stuff that you need to balance this. And especially because you have come and shared this with 80 people today. So thank you for your openness, for your vulnerability, for your really, really brilliant insights. We have a couple more minutes and I want to get into some other questions. So for all of you listening in, please, if you have a question that you are sitting with, you can put it in the chat. We'll try to bring it in. I want to bring in a little bit of some practical exploration. And it was in our agenda, but I didn't get to it. So I'm making a little space for it now. And it's this idea of, okay, this all sounds, it's super powerful. You're all saying it takes time. You got to chip away at it. Sometimes there's these, you got to look internally. And then at the same time, you all are experimenting with some trust-based approach, maybe not even experimenting, but trying this out, doing actually that trust-based relationship building work that we've been talking about. You're all doing it in various ways. And it's a way of kind of like, almost like it can be a way of demystifying it for current and future donors. Like, look, we're doing it and it's actually more impactful and the sky's not falling in. So like, take a look. So I'm curious if any of you are moved to share of some ways that you're doing trust-based philanthropy that you see as a way to inspire and bring along donors who may not totally get it or may not be bought into it. And this is just open to anyone who would like to share.
I can share quickly that we have a handful of giving circles, and one of our giving circles is the Future Fund. It's focused on young donors, and we've been able to do some really incredible TBP centered work with them, how they give away money, how they recruit, the composition of their advisory council. And I think that what has been so wonderful about that is being able to, one, they're bold, they're open, they want to understand their bias, the power dynamics. And so we can have these conversations with them, but then take the various ways that they do their work together as a giving circle, and then share that, within the foundation spheres to donors, to our board, to other giving circles. I wouldn't say that it's always, there's some fear about it. And we see sometimes like this giving circle is like, oh my God, I'm really nervous about that. But I love going back to the peer pressure comment in a different context. The best thing that I think we can do is have donors engage donors and hear that peer experience of TBP, how they've engaged with it, whether it's through a giving circle or in their own personal philosophies, because it also settles the power dynamic a little bit and takes staff out of the equation. And so I'm always looking for opportunities where we can have donors themselves be ambassadors for this work and change in philosophy, and have them be the messengers and part of the change work along with us.
That's brilliant. I love that example. We are winding down on time. There's a question that came into the chat that I want to lift up around what can others in the broader philanthropy sector do to be supportive of you all and leaders like you who are holding so much in this work, leading community foundations, managing donors. What would you like to see from your other allies and peers in philanthropy outside of community foundations?
It's so simple. I mean, I tell community members this all the time. People who have access are very used to using their access all the time. And those who have not had access are not used to flexing that power. And I would say if any of this resonates with you, you see a community foundation near you who's doing great work, send an email, pick up the phone, look at the board, who is on the board that you have relationship with, and tell them this is different and this matters. And I would say you make that a monthly thing. You put it on your calendar, and every day on the 10th, you're going to send an email to a different person. You're going to pick up the phone and call a different person, because just as much pressure that comes from different sides that say this is the wrong way, we need to mobilize and say this is the right way, because I believe, I have chills right now, you can't see it. I believe there's more people who know that that's true, but don't know how important their email or phone call is.
Love it. Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you to Pamela Ross, Patricia Mejia, Marisa Magallanes for such an open and powerful discussion. Thank you for your stories, for your candor, for bringing your whole selves. I'm serious. I hope you can all take the rest of the week off as a mental health day just for now. We've gained so much from this discussion, and I'll look forward to working with our team to distill some of these notes and share back with everyone. So to transition us, we want to invite everyone here to reflect on just this question. After you've heard some of these insights and inspirations from today, how would you like your donors to engage with you in order to allow you to be more trust-based and community-centric? And I would actually broaden this too. What needs to exist within your organizations to allow for that? What inspiration have you taken from this discussion that inspires you to take steps to move toward being a more relevant, community-centric, and trust-based community foundation? So we invite you to sit with that reflection and do with it what you will. And if you want to share some of your own reflections in the chat, please do so. And just some final takeaways, or just some ways to think about making the case. And honestly, after hearing all the insights today, I think we'll want to build upon this, because this was written before we heard the additional insights that came up. But really, community foundations are uniquely positioned to cultivate the relationships necessary for effective and transformative philanthropy. And so when donors trust the community foundation staff as relationship brokers, as values brokers, it allows for more meaningful and sustained impact. And that sustained impact piece really kind of jumped out for me in today's discussion, because this is about taking a longer view on what communities need. And I think all three of our speakers really spoke to that. And so that's something that really kind of shined for us. And then these conditions of having that kind of trust, having the internal trust and support, having the trust and support of donors creates the conditions for greater transparency, learning, and mutual accountability. And of course, when nonprofits have time, flexibility, and trust from funders, it allows them to focus on the mission critical work, to pursue the opportunities that they see for their community. And this will ultimately strengthening our communities will require the leadership of the people closest to the issues that we seek to address as funders, donors, community foundation leaders. And this is it's a learning framework. There were a few other reflections that I think came up in here that really around just the internal work, the journey, the process that this takes, the time, meeting people where they're at and holding all of that space and building in time for really acknowledging that this is hard work, particularly for women of color in these positions. And that needs to be acknowledged, and there needs to be space made to talk about that and supports internally to support that. This is an ongoing conversation. We appreciate you all for listening in, for bringing your questions and your curiosities. We particularly appreciate our speakers for bringing their full selves to this discussion and such powerful and relevant and resonant insights. And also thank you to the Iowa Council on Foundations and Philanthropy Northwest for partnering with the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project on this two-part series. If you want more, let us know. We have a survey that we'll be sending out and invite you to share what more you want to see. And if you want to have more discussions with other allies and colleagues in the community foundation space, let us know that as well. And we will take that into consideration as we continue to build out tools and spaces for learning. And with that, I will be closing us out and just thank you all and hope you have a great rest of your week. And thank you for being with us. Have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.